With the launch of our final episode of the yearly cycle, we have had some absolute bangers when it comes to our weapon rollouts. I know in previous episodes, we didn't really have much to grind for. Nothing really stood out outside of like a select few. But in Heresy, that has drastically changed. From weapons like Cycle Pop, Adamantine, Abyssal Edge, to Unloved and Unsworn from the dungeon, to a linear exotic, which literally gives us our very own turret on the battlefield. From a sandbox perspective, guys, this has been one of the best episodes yet. Today, we're going to be reviewing yet another weapon, which is joining this very potent arsenal, that being the new Strand SMG, Mirror Imago. Now get this, it is the first 900 round per minute Strand adaptive frame SMG. And if you're checking yourself wondering what the hell is an adaptive frame, that's completely understandable because no one has seen adaptives in a very long time. Now what this frame is supposed to possess is that it's well-rounded, it's reliable, it's sturdy, TLDR, it's an easier weapon to use. Or so it says. Now to get this SMG, you can either target loot it through the Tome of Wands. To get the adept version, you'll need to run Court of Blades on the expert mode. But I will say RNG here is fickle. I feel like every adept drop I get is garbage. But yes, there is a shiny variant to this, and even a shiny adept variant where it's your adept version of Mirror Imago, but 2 traits in columns 3, 2 traits in columns 4, and the 2 origin traits. We've got an entire guide on Act 2 if you want to check that one out. That'll be linked down below. Now to kick things off, I want to start by comparing our base stats of Mirror Imago to some of our other adaptive frame SMGs. Think things like Parabellum, Hero's Burden, Pizzicato. You're probably like, whoa, those are adaptives? Yeah. Now stat-wise, you can see they all have fairly similar stat packages. I know stats are really important inside of PvP. The range here, though, pretty much in line. Stability, a little bit better. Its handling actually comes in worse, but its aim assist is pretty good, and its recoil direction is practically maxed out. I'll say with my time using this weapon, it feels good. I would say the biggest downside to Mirror Imago, and I know it's such a small thing, but when you shoot it, it just does not sound fierce. And I know like SMGs in general don't sound like crazy when you shoot them, but even in SMG standards, in my opinion, Mirror Imago kind of falls behind. But again, who cares about that? We just care if it kills things. Which takes us to our traits. In columns 3, we have Recycled Energy, Subsistence, Grave Robber, Pugilist, To the Pain, Moving Targets, and Overflow. In our 4th column, we have Hatchling, Target Lock, Swashbuckler, Sword Logic, Permeability, Offense Strike, and Unrelenting. Now I'm going to cover PvE first before we start diving into PvP, because PvP, I had a very interesting time with this SMG. Let's start with some of the traits though that really work well in that 3rd trait column. First up, we have Subsistence. Fantastic for ad-level content. It starts to dip off a bit more in harder in content, especially GMs, where not even a single magazine can get a kill. However, when you start tacking on certain things like unraveling rounds, it's a lot easier to keep Subsistence up. Now the perk states that defeating a target partially reloads the magazine from reserves. Typically, this is 10% of the magazine size rounded up from reserves on a kill. However, for SMGs and auto rifles, kills refill 17% of the magazine rounded up, with the enhanced version refilling 20% of the mag. So again, a bit better and a bit more manageable. Next, we have the new perk Recycled Energy. Reloading after defeating a target grants energy to your lowest charged ability. Not really a perk that we've talked about all that much outside of our original breakdown of it. Essentially though, when you get a kill, you reload, it provides you ability energy to your lowest charged ability. The only issue I have with it right now is that the enhanced version doesn't seem to give us an increased amount of ability gains, even though it's supposed to. Now, another good ammo-centric perk that has actually risen in the ranks is Grave Robber. Grave Robber states that melee final blows or dealing melee damage with a charged melee reloads this weapon's magazine from reserves. Now, this is described as a elemental melee hit or a glaive melee hit, which then fully refills the magazine from reserves, with a 3-second cooldown between activation, with the enhanced version providing a passive +5 handling bump. Now, I actually do like Grave Robber for damage phases, especially for like Warlocks with Strand Needle. Just a great way to top off ammo in the middle of a damage phase. Is it practical for a primary weapon? Really, it just depends on your build. I've actually had like Lightning Surge, Synthesize loadouts, often submitted for build battles. And so yes, for like a melee-based build like that, where I'm practically running around constantly casting my melee, that's something that Mirror Imago with Grave Robber could lean into. Now, another great pick though is Overflow. This says that picking up special or heavy ammo automatically loads this weapon beyond normal capacity. Now, the overfill amount maxes out at 100% of the mag capacity and can be activated while stowed, with the enhanced version providing you 120% mag capacity. Now, I will say for Overflow, I've kind of leaned away from it when it comes to primary weapons. It's great on special. Not saying you can't use it here. It's still a good option. And when you take into account our origin traits and the amount of ammo that you can spawn in, especially this season, yes, you do have to to juggle things a bit more. With it being a primary weapon, you'll have to expend some special or some heavy in order to proc Overflow. But I can see why some people would give this trait a go. Now moving on to our fourth column perks. I'm going to start with Hatchling. Hatchling states that precision final blows or rapidly defeating targets with this weapon spawns a threadling at the target's location. Upon scoring a precision kill or 3 kills within 3 seconds of each, a threadling will spawn at the enemy's death location, with the enhanced version giving us a passive +5 bump there to handle it. Now with the amount of Strand artifact mods that we have along with our new boosts that came with Act 2, which by the way are amazing, in my opinion, Hatchling is actually really good. Threadlings do a substantial amount of damage, especially if you're going full Strand. Look no further than the most recent build battles that we've been doing with Barrel Dyad. That's a Strand SMG, and we've been in love with it. However, Mirror Imago is a legendary weapon, and it doesn't have the damage that Barrel Dyad has. Another perk to look out for, though, is Swashbuckler, especially if you're doing Swashbuckler and Grave Robber together. As a single melee kill, will give you Swashbuckler ×5, increasing your damage by 33.3%. The Stowing does remove the buff. However, the enhanced version increases the duration of Swashbuckler from 4.5 seconds to 6.5 seconds, which is pretty nice. And keep in mind, you can still get Swashbuckler stacks by simply getting weapon kills. It just takes 5 to get to that max. Now moving on to our next damage perk, we have Sword Logic. Now this one's kind of in the spotlight right now, as Bungie felt its presence on Regency stock was a little too strong, which is why it caught a nerf here recently. However, this was only in PvP. Sword Logic states that final blows with this weapon grant bonus damage. The strength and duration of the bonus increases when more powerful targets are defeated. So when you kill different types of enemies, you will receive a different buff. For instance, miners will grant you 1 stack. This is a 15% increase in damage, and it lasts for 5.5 seconds. Elites, however, will grant you 2 stacks, and this is a 25% increase, and this lasts for 7.5 seconds. Mini bosses grant 3 stacks, which is a 35% increase for 10.5 seconds, and then if you happen to get a boss that you kill with Mirror Imago, that will give you 4 stacks, which is a 50% damage buff and lasts for 15.5 seconds. Now, additional kills do refresh the buff timer, but they only apply at the stack of the highest enemy rank kill. Now, let me just say, guys, this is a wonderful perk. I love Sword Logic. Now, are you going to be walking around with 4 stacks of Sword Logic? Probably not that often. However, just 3 stacks alone is 35%, and it lasts for 10.5 seconds. In my opinion, it's easier to keep up with higher upsides. Plus, it just sounds dope, man. Sword Logic. Now, as far as the other perks in this final column, Target Lock is okay, especially if you're combining it with, say, Overflow. This ramps up damage as you blow your load into them, but you need to exceed that 110% mark on its magazine size in order to get the full buff. Now listen, I like Target Lock, at least inside of PvP and on certain weapons. But for an SMG, where you're swapping from target to targets, you are losing that damage buff. Or something like Sword Logic, you get a kill, you're able to maintain that damage buff and carry it to all the different ads you're trying to clear. Target Lock is great for laying into a boss or champion, and I just don't see myself doing that often with this SMG. As far as the other perks, though, Unrelenting would have been an S tier choice, but of course Unrelenting has been nerfed in the Nether activity. Permeability is also present here, where using your class ability changes this weapon's damage type to match your equipped super until you stow the weapon. I wish permeability was in that third column. Like, I just imagine what would happen if I proc permeability. I turn Mirror Imago into a void weapon. I then proc volatile, and then I pair it with, say, Hatchling. I got volatile explosions making threadlings. That sounds wild. But yeah, permeability is nothing too crazy right here. I do tend to keep at least 1 roll of it just for future updates as like a just in case, but that's why our vault is always max. Now that we covered our PvE perks, though, let's go over our origin traits. And the base version of this can roll with Willing Vessel. The shiny variant can roll with both Willing Vessel and Runneth Over. Now, Willing Vessel states that dealing damage or defeating targets with this weapon gradually grants increased stability, handling, reload speed, and charge rates. This effect gradually decreases over time, but is gained more quickly while near allies. Now, this provides our SMG with some very nice buffs, just simply for using the weapon, and it's something you can take advantage of even inside of PvP. Our second origin trait, though, is Runneth Over. This one, in my opinion, is the one you need to be looking out for, guys. It states that reloading their allies overflows the magazine. The reason why this one is good is that when you finish your reload, the magazine will overfill from reserves by 10% 10% of the base mag rounded up for each ally that's nearby. This allows it to reach a maximum of 50% overfill. I will say the biggest downside to this origin trait is that, well, while you play solo, you don't really get the overflow benefits, so that sucks. But an interesting workaround is that allies can also refer to ally NPCs. So for instance, if you're like in a low sector or a battleground with some friendly cabal, these will actually count toward Runneth Over. But for the most part, if you're playing solo, probably best to go with Willing Vessel. And if you're running in a fire team, run Runneth Over. Now, before we talk about our god roll, we need to talk about the Strand synergies that this weapon can pull off. We get comments a lot on here where folks are saying, why should I even commit to artifact mods? It's temporary. Guys, that's kind of the beautiful thing of artifact mods. They bring us things that are super powerful, borderline busted, but because they are temporary, they are allowed. But also temporary is not that temporary. Episodes are already 4 months along, and Heresy itself is going to be at least another 3 months. That's a lot of time, guys. So in my opinion, get comfortable. These artifact mods and these synergies are here to stay, at least for the near future. Starting with our first option, we have Unraveling Orbs. This states that picking up an Orb of Power or a Tangle grants Strand weapons unraveling rounds. And the boost for this is really nice. It states that Strand weapons have increased damage against Strand debuff targets, which is a self-loop here. You've got unraveling rounds, which is super easy to proc, and then boom, now you've got a damage buff, which by the way, works inside of PvP. Now this buff is a 5% increase in damage, so nothing too crazy, but still, extra damage. On top of that, unraveling rounds also provides the ability to stun barrier champions, which is great because we don't have really anything in our artifact mods for submachine guns. Jumping over to our fourth column though, we have Horde Shuttle. This states that damaging unraveled targets with a weapon occasionally spawns a threadling. Now the amount of damage needed to spawn a threadling is actually dependent based on the enemy type. For instance, in our testing, we were basically spawning a threadling on a minor enemy in one single body shot after being procced with unraveling rounds. Now it was a bit harder to test on Carl because of all the different damage numbers, but it took roughly the entire magazine's worth to get a threadling to proc. The main point being that just by doing damage to unraveled targets, you're going to be spawning in a lot of threadlings. However, for higher health targets, more damage is needed. There is a 0.5 second cooldown between those threadling procs, which is hardly noticeable. Now there is an artifact boost that you can get for your threadlings that have the ability to inflict sever when dealing damage. Now if you're looking at this in the Tome of Want, the text on that is actually incorrect. It's actually the text that's the boost underneath Horde Shuttle that's the correct one. Essentially though, this is like giving everyone swarmers, and this pairs beautifully with Unraveling Orbs, as this is another way to get that 5% damage buff, as you have your threadlings that will be severing targets, therefore applying that debuff. This is some great synergy, guys. We haven't even talked about committing to a Strand subclass specifically. Thread of Evolution provides our threadlings with more range and more damage. Thread of Rebirth grants us a chance to create a threadling on Strand weapon kills. You've got Thread of Propagation, which gives us unraveling rounds when getting power melee kills. Not that that's really needed here, but hell, why not? Not to mention going even deeper into things like aspects for our different classes. I don't want to get too carried away. The point is, these artifact mods are very good, and I highly advise taking advantage of both of these and their boosts. Now, another new build crafting option that we have in Heresy is the addition of our new fragile mods. Now, these mods can only be slotted in our seasonal weapons, which Imago is a part of. Now, these mods at the end of the season will break. So kind of like artifact mods, we are limited to using these mods only for this season. Now, we talked about the first one, which was Power of Resolve, which is pretty good, but I want to talk about Power of Ambition. This mod states that rapid hits with this weapon grants blight rounds, dealing damage over time to targets hit by this weapon. Strong against overload champions. Now, how this works is that after scoring a certain amount of hits, for Imago here it's 26, you will be granted blight rounds for 10 seconds. Now, the buff is unable to be refreshed until the duration is up. Now, during this time, dealing weapon damage inflicts blighted while blight rounds are active, and you can see that on the bottom left above your super bar. Think of blighted being similar to our aerial denial frame GLs, or even like OG Witherhoard. Blighted deals elemental matching damage every 0.267 seconds, up to 7 times over 2 seconds after a 0.48 second delay. Now, the blighted duration can be refreshed by the blight damage, which ticks up to a max of 45 ticks. Now, confirmed here by Max on X, you can see that while using Power of Ambition with the SMG, the tick damage against minors is 483.8. On elites, the tick damage is about 448.2. And then on mini bosses, champions, and bosses, it ticks for 337.5. Now, keep in mind, guys, this ticks for 45 times. In our testing, we actually were getting a damage number of 362 on Coral, but we do know how finicky numbers can be, and of course, Coral is just finicky in general. But the point is that this mod is very good. Not only does it do some pretty nice damage passively, but it also provides whatever weapon you put it on overload stunning capabilities. So similar to weapons like Tenacious Ashes, or even our newest seasonal bow, Animesis, you have the ability to stun multiple champions with a single weapon. So for Imago's case, Unraveling for Barrier, and Power of Ambition for Overload. On top of that, the damage that the ticks do themselves count as weapon damage, which is great because that means it can be buffed with things like damage perks or surge mods, and it scales depending on the stacks that you have. For instance, in our testing, you can see here that we hit Carl for 362 tick damage. However, with Sword Logic times 1, that goes up to 417, and then times 3, it goes up to 489. So again, I don't know if you guys are utilizing these different fragile mods, but they're good. One of the beautiful things about them is that when you equip them, it passively grants overcharge to the weapon when the modifier is active, which is a further 25% boosted damage. Now, another thing to note is that this mod works inside of PvP, and it will surprisingly kill anyone who is affected by the blight and doesn't get healed. And it can also spread to multiple targets, as it has a 10-second timer. Granted, though, it takes 26 shots to proc, so not necessarily the most realistic thing inside of PvP, but it can happen. In my opinion, guys, take full advantage of these fragile mods, especially this one. It's an extra layer of build crafting that really amps things up, further improving our lethality. Now, I know you're probably thinking, Cross, Jesus, how long is this review gonna be? I know, guys, we haven't even made it to the PvP portion. It's thick! But this takes us to our PvE God Roll. In my opinion, I don't think you can go wrong with anything in that third column that's helping you out with ammo, especially considering we have Runneth Over on our shiny row. Subsistence is a great choice, allowing you to slay out and just have your magazine reload with kills. No, it doesn't proc Runneth Over though. That has to be a manual reload. Still doesn't mean it's not a nice perk, especially when you pair it with things like Sword Logic. You've got one perk feeding you ammo, another perk that's giving you a damage bump. This allows you to just run in and mindlessly kill. Then you have Grave Robber. The instant reload on melees is nice, especially if you're leaning into a melee-based build, and perhaps you want to do Swashbuckler. It's synergies that do match up with each other that I feel like some of you would want to use it with certain builds. However, I do think a good choice in that third column is Overflow. I think Overflow by itself is kind of like, all right, sure, we could possibly make it work. Now, you may be wondering, does Runneth Over stack with Overflow? This does not proc together. You don't have the synergy that we were hoping for. I was actually hoping we were going to get Overflow and Runneth Over together to proc to give us like this huge magazine size, but that's just not the case here. Now, what about our barrel perk and mag perk for our PvE rolls? Since we're going the route of increasing our mag size, I would definitely say a mag perk is going to be needed here. I don't necessarily think extended mag is the way to go because it just kills reload speed. You've got tag mag for the +2, while also getting +10 in your reload and some extra stability. You've got a pendant mag for the +4 with no downside. Both pretty good perks. I also like Alloy Magazine. I think that's a really solid one. Definitely not a good perk if you're like a habitual reloader at the top of your magazine, but if you're always bringing it down to like 50% or less, that's definitely a beneficial magazine option. Now, as far as your barrel perks, you've got Fluted, which is really nice for the stability and handling. I actually like a little more range on mine, so even something like Corkscrew Rifling is nice. You just don't want damage fall off hitting you, even inside of PvE. So having a little more range may be something for you to consider. Overall, guys, inside of PvE, Imago is a fantastic option. It's a Strand 900 round per minute SMG. And yes, DPS wise, adapters do fall behind in terms of optimal damage per second, but they have more forgiveness as they do more body shot damage to their lightweight counterparts. And the main takeaway for this one is its double origin traits, its fragile mod capabilities, and its ability to synergize with our potent strand mods this season. I think Imago is an excellent weapon to choose. Now, I know some of you may be thinking, Cross, why would I use this over Imminence, the Salvation's Edge SMG? And let me be frank, Imminence is phenomenal. It's got the ability to roll things like Slice and Demolitionist in that third column. It's got similar perks like Target Lock and Hatchling in that fourth column, as well as options like Firefly and Chaos Reshaped. And both SMGs are 900s, with Imminence being a lightweight SMG versus Imago, which is an adaptive. And keep in mind, lightweights do have a little more DPS in terms of optimal, but adaptives actually have better body shot DPS. You'd be right in the fact that they both take advantage of our great strand artifact mods that we have this season, but what Imminence cannot replicate though is the ability to juice your magazine size and the ability to rock fragile mods. It's a temporary thing, I know, but those fragile mods are very good. On top of that, stat-wise, Imago pretty much outpaces Imminence in many of the major categories that matter inside of PvP. Range, stability. His handling is a little bit less, and his base mag size is also a little bit less, but keep in mind, if you're running Imago inside of PvE with Runneth Over, you'll be just fine. On top of that, Salvation's Edge isn't exactly the easiest thing to farm. There's still a ton of players that have never even taken a step inside of that raid, whereas Imago should be an easier one to obtain. Which takes us to PvP. PvP, I didn't know what to expect from this. Yes, I like Hero's Burden, but for the most part, when I consider an SMG in this top slot, I am always going to be looking at Immortal. Immortal, even in its nerf state, is so good. You gotta understand, guys, Immortal was so strong, Bungie nerfed it like 3 different times. Now, Imago is not like pre-nerf Immortal, but it is very good. A lot better than I expected, and surprisingly good on controller. I don't know how my other controller players feel, but SMGs to me just never felt good on controller. It always felt superior for mouse and keyboard. But after playing with Imago on controller, guys, I can say it's solid. It's sticky, man. It lands those shots, and there were many 1v1s that I felt completely confident going into, to in the least get a trade with whoever I was fighting. This is where like the intrinsic, that adaptive intrinsic comes into play that I feel like controller players will enjoy. I'm not even a good controller player, and I felt very good using Imago. The question is, what is the God roll for PvP players? I think anything that boosts your range. I like Hammerforge, I like Accurize. We're talking 62 range. You give me a ranged masterwork, we're up to 72. You get the adept version, now we're up to 82. That's the way to go, man. And let me just say, stat-wise, there's not many SMGs that can compare to that range, which is the particular role that I'm talking about, at least stated from D2 Foundry, can reach up to almost 22 meters, which is crazy. Now, all of that matters not if you can't land your shots, which takes us to our trait combinations. I think in our third column, we have To the Pain and Moving Targets. Both of those are great perks, both helping you out with landing those shots, making them connect, with the enhanced versions improving them even more. Now, I'm personally like a huge fan of To the Pain. I think it's nuts. The only issue that To the Pain requires is that you keep the weapon out if you're trying to maintain those stacks. Moving Targets doesn't require that. It just flat out gives you the increase in aim assist, with also the decrease there in ADS movement speed penalty. I think both of those are still very good, and either one of those are going to serve you just fine inside of PvP. Now, in our fourth column, Target Lock looks to be the way to go, at least for bringing down our time to kill. You see, when you use Enhanced Target Lock, this allows you to get that bump in damage sooner in the magazine, and it also increases your damage more. Simultaneously, though, if you use this in combination with, say, our Strand artifact mods and the boost there from Unraveling Rounds, which is a 5% damage increase, this also applies to PvP. Essentially, what we're looking at here, guys, and again, this is based on our testing. The numbers on D2 Foundry is still a little off here. But at tier 10 resilience, you can get the kill in 12 crits, 1 body, in 0.8 seconds. At tier 9 and tier 6 resilience, you can get the kill in 12 crits, 0.73 seconds. And then from tier 5 resilience and below, you can get the kill in 11 crits, 1 body, 0.73 seconds. Now, with Enhanced Target Lock, this actually allows you to get the kill in 10 crits, 2 body, even at tier 10 resilience in 0.73 seconds, with the ability to get the kill at tier 9 resilience at 0.67 seconds in 11 crits. And then from tier 5 resilience and below, it's 10 crits, 1 body. Now, I will say, if you compare this to, say, like a lightweight SMG, keep in mind adaptives do less damage per crit than their lightweight counterparts. Same rounds per minute. It's just the difference is that lightweights do a tiny bit more crit damage, where adaptives do a tiny bit more body shot damage. Again, just like PvE, this is supposed to allow for more forgiveness, making it an easier weapon to use. Granted, one of the benefits of using lightweight SMGs inside of PvP is that handling bump. That movement speed. Those are some of the standout features of that archetype. Now, do I believe Enhanced Target Lock is the say-all, end-all in that final column? No, if you want to be weird, you can do Offhand Strike. Les has literally been running around with like Offhand Strike, and I think even To the Pain, and just relying on those two perks in combination, of course, with Radiant Dance Machines. Personally, I'm not that crazy about hip firing with this thing, especially for my controller players. In my opinion, if you're not going to go the route of Target Lock, then I think Sword Logic is also a great option. Yes, it has recently been nerfed inside of PvP, but I still think it puts out. Outside of that, Swashbuckler, if you're leaning into a melee-based build, but that one's always hit or miss. Like pre-shoulder charge nerf all day long. We can combine this with Grease. We can go in, get the melee kill off, get the ×5 Swashbuckler, and then go to Pound Town. However, today, man, shoulder charge just feels so inconsistent. Personally, I just think that Enhanced Target Lock is the way to go. Tag on max range, do either To the Pain or Moving Targets, and make sure you're using the Willing Vessel origin traits. This gives you that increase there in stability and handling, which is really nice considering that this isn't a lightweight SMG. But hopefully the handling bumps there will assist with that. Overall, guys, I think Imago all around is really good, both for PvE and for PvP. I was pleasantly surprised with it, especially inside of PvP, because I just wasn't expecting it to be good, considering that we have Immortal as our other Strand SMG. Yes, that's a different archetype, but that I just didn't think I was gonna have an SMG here that I would want over Immortal. And here we are. And to make it even better, it feels phenomenal even on control. So guys, let me know in the comments below what you think of Mirror Imago. Definitely a weapon to go after. You've got all season long, but lock down that God roll because this thing puts out. Fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching. And as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.